I think it's, it's a comedy of people's manners and how how they lose those manners. And I will say, I mean, it's the thing that really makes it work is that each character is so well drawn, and they're all very, very different. It does sort of underline the fragility of the relationships and how, how fraught we all are with all of the wounds that we drag along with us throughout our relationships with our children, our relationships with our parents, and those things play out within every piece of dialogue that we have. I mean, it's so beautifully written, this play, and it's dizzying. So it starts out in this kind of polite way, and then very quickly it starts gaining momentum and gaining momentum and gaining momentum until it becomes a real rapid fire. But I think Carnage, shortening it to Carnage, which I think is going to happen on this film, I think it is an interesting idea. It allows you, to discover within the story, what that meant. But I think it gives it this primitive feeling in a much more primitive way. And I think that's really what the movie's about, is about all of these, polite people kind of finding their more primitive side. I don't know if there's any hard and fast moral to the story. I think mostly it really is just about an experience of watching people become their more primitive selves and reveal themselves in a truer way. All these people who are being so phony. At the beginning, when we first started the film, we were shooting in chronological order. I think Roman's directions to everybody was just more phony, more phony, more phony, more phony. Could you be more fake? And I think that, that's really where they start out in the process. They start out saying, I'm so sorry, and, what can we do to help? And, oh, don't worry, it's all fine, this happens. And little by little, it devolves into the real feelings that are behind it. Our ideas about morality are really constructs. And that, in fact, we're all very primitive, and that, we're all monstrous in some ways, and that if we probably took responsibility for that, we'd probably be better off and happier. This is what couples go through every single day of their lives. I mean, this is the undercurrent of what people go through every single day of their lives. I make movies about families. As a director, I make movies about families and couples all the time, and that really is my fascination, my obsession, how this tapestry comes together and how all of these dynamics come together in a positive and negative way. And, that's what intimacy is. If you want to be intimate with somebody, it gets really ugly. They came to me with the role. So Penelope, who was Veronica in the play, it seemed like a very good fit. She's incredibly serious and takes everything way too seriously and is very politically correct. And in the beginning, in a way, you can play that normally in a sort of dramatic way, and then as time goes on, it becomes more and more, more and more of a satire of a regular person. I am an uptight woman who works at a bookstore, but who's writing a book on suffering in Africa, and can't seem to get that out of her mind. And she's almost like a human rights court. She wants to do the same thing and is appalled by these two people that have come into her home that she feels over and over again by everything that they say and that they demonstrate just don't seem to care at the plight of the world and how terrible this circumstance is. John C. Reilly, who plays Michael, his relationship with me is that he's just a good guy, and he listens to me, but he just is trying to make peace, and he kind of thinks that my uptightness is just a little too much, and the way he avoids that is by drinking his favorite scotch. Yeah.
The story says a lot about not only parenting and the way we relate to our children and how we, I think, at times over-supervise our children. It also says things about gender, the women, eventually the men kind of square off together like, she's driving me crazy. Yeah, and she's driving me crazy, so maybe you and I can find comfort in a glass of scotch with each other. And the women do the same thing, like, he does that? Yeah, well, mine does this, which is also a very common thing among couples. I think what's great about the story is that it approaches these intellectual ideas, and the characters are actually discussing these ideas, but that's not what's going on. It's funny, like oftentimes in life, there's what we're talking about, and then there's the way we're behaving. And there's a story of how we're behaving towards each other underneath the story of what we're actually saying to each other. And this is a classic example of that, I think, the script. We're talking about these high ideas and, aspirations and, our belief systems and our place in the world. and meanwhile we're sort of acting like these children with, the dynamics of our relationship become slowly unveiled, and I think that's the key to the success of Yasmina's play. Yeah, there's all these sort of little revealing moments about our belief systems that we are quick to judge the other people on, but it's much harder to admit our own frailties. But that's what satire does, It's a perfect setup for comedy, I think, because whenever you put people in a situation that is difficult for them to deal with and make them behave in a way that keeps things polite, that's an age-old recipe for comedy.
Well, the situation at the beginning is that Nancy and Alan Cowan have a son, Zachary, and he is 11, and Penelope and Michael Longstreet have a son, Ethan, who is also 11, and the two boys have had a fight in the playground, and my son has hit their son with a stick and broken two of his teeth. So they are coming together. They have been in Nancy and Alan, my character, and Christoph's character. We have been invited to the Longstreet's house to just try and talk this through, to try and figure out a way to get the boys to patch this up, and to just resolve it, come to some level of resolve. But everyone approaches it with a very different opinion, with a very different attitude, and all hell breaks loose. And before you know it, it becomes nothing to do with the boys and their fight, but entirely to do with these two different marriages and the cracks that lie between them. It's a window on so many of our worlds. It's about parenting, it's about the complexities of parenting, it's about differing opinions about how children should be raised, but more importantly, it's about the great, endless, complex dynamic that marriage truly is. And to have turned it into a comedy in the way that Yasmina did is something that is even more enriching and colourful and enlightening, I think, for everybody, to be able to laugh at ourselves, to be able to make fun of the human condition in this particular context is the thing that I think, no matter what language you speak or which country you're in, or what your personal circumstances are, we've all, as adults, experienced some part of what this play is about. Well, I think, it's there's no handbook, there's no guidebook to how to act, how to, be funny, sad, so you have to rely on the writing, I think, with a piece like this, because the comedy is in the writing, it's in the story, and it's within the framework of how the piece is set up. And I think acknowledging the fact that it's a satire, yes, that's important to do, and we've all been able to do that. But you can't play these moments and try and make them funny. You have to sort of play the sincerity of the moment, or the lunacy of the moment, or just how ridiculous the entire situation is. Sometimes it's funny in and of itself. So it's about knowing, it's about knowing when to do something that might actually be amusing on camera, or when to just rely on the circumstances to be the thing that is humorous. But I've learned so much about that, because I have done some comedy before, but not that much. And you learn these things as you go, and kind of hope for the best a little bit, and hope that you are doing something that is, sincere and funny. Throughout this piece, we hear all of these characters use really aggressive, robust words as either weapons or ways of explaining their own emotions or their perception of what someone else is thinking. And and there are reactions to that, and none of them take responsibility for the words that come out of their mouths at all. And that's one of the reasons why it unravels in the way that it does. No one takes responsibility for anything that they say. And, life can't be like that, because then look what happens. That's why it becomes this thing that it does. And that's all, again, been brilliantly written into the screenplay, is this sense of no one taking responsibility, no one atoning for anything, no one apologizing. I think the only person who says sorry is Nancy. She says, I'm sorry, Doodle. I'm sorry, Doodle. She says it to Alan when she's just apologizing for completely ruining his life because she drowned his telephone in the vase of tulips.
I like movies that just play in a confined space. Now, I wouldn't say this is Roman's specialty, but I've seen movies of Romans that did play in confined spaces, and they were fabulous. I don't know whether I necessarily thought it was cinematic, but in connection with Roman's name, it certainly was. The other day there was a little discord, and Roman said, look, don't tell me I've been doing this job for 60 years. And there's no arguing with it. Roman doesn't make any mistakes. He made his first movie a year before I was born, and I'm not exactly 25 anymore, So what am I? I'm gonna question his choices? This is a guarantee that it will be the right thing to do, whatever he says. It would be my loss not to do what he says. 60 years of experience as a filmmaker, and not exactly a filmmaker that failed with his first few movies, Roman is one of the very, very few who worked throughout 60 years on the top level, not in terms of career, but in terms of craft of filmmaking.